Welcome, everybody, to this new episode of CCIR's Student Spotlight. With me today is Rushat Aboti, who is a current senior at Dougherty Valley High School in the Bay Area. During his time at CCIR, Rushat was a member of Daniel Muthukrishna's course on data-driven astronomy from MIT. And for his project at CCIR, Rushat worked on a project that predicted a word that I actually don't know what it means, but photometric redshifts using neural network models. So we're really excited to have you here today, Rushat, to learn a little bit about your experience and hear a little bit about your project. So first things first, Rushat, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here too.
So Rushat, why don't we begin just before the beginning. And could you say a little bit about what first led you to CCIR and what drew you in particular about this course on data-driven astronomy?
So I've always been interested in physics, astronomy, and I wanted to learn more about machine learning since it's like something that's more trendy right now. So I wanted to get myself involved in that and somehow see how that relates to physics and how I can utilize computer science and physics to like make new models. So that's how I came across CCIR because I was like trying to research programs that like not only show practical applications, but also like help me work with a mentor who actually knows what they're doing. And that's why I selected the data-driven astronomy course, because that like almost perfectly aligns with my interests, which are, as I told before, physics and computer science. So just involving those two aspects into one is something that I found interesting and new.
Cool. And what was, tell me a little bit about this course. So tell me what data-driven astronomy actually is.
So in the modern age of astronomical data, like you could say maybe 200 years ago, most of astronomy was done by looking at telescopes, using telescopes to look at the sky, right? But now it's changed quite a bit because we have like modern machinery and more telescopes that are actually in space and other surveys. So a lot of astronomy today is just using data and analyzing the data to come up with predictions or values regarding certain things, right? So just utilizing this data involves a lot of computer science since it's not feasible to do it just by a human itself. So involving like machine learning and other just normal statistical analysis makes it much easier to make the data make sense and like draw conclusions from what the data means.
Excellent. And tell me a little bit about your journey in particular in this course. So what were, maybe give me some of the sort of key highlights of the favorite modules that you guys did during the course.
So I think as most people might know, the course is structured into two parts. Like the first half of the course is the lecture and the second half is where you actually do the research. So initially the course began a bit slow for me because I was having a little bit of trouble catching up. And so I think the highlights of the course were when I actually learned new concepts. So not just astronomy, but also I learned how to like utilize data-driven techniques in astronomy. So when I learned more about building simple machine learning models or neural networks, I think that was the key highlight. And then in the second part of the course where we started the research, I think the hardest part was just getting started with the research. So I wouldn't call that a highlight, but moving forward, it's just that eureka moment where you actually figure out something that you've been trying for so long. So I think just figuring out the ideal model that gives the most accurate results was probably the highlight of the course.
So one thing that you touched on just now there is, I guess, some of the differences between taking CCIR's course and maybe your previous experiences with studying physics and the way that CCIR has this research focus and a much more project-driven approach. Tell me a little bit about the differences that you felt between CCIR's program and maybe your past experiences with science, and how you navigated those differences.
I think the primary difference is initially the lectures are quite similar to like what you would encounter in your school, but the only difference in the lectures is that they're more fast-paced and you're expected to be more independent and more creative with your answers. So that was one thing that stood out. And of course, learning from a world-class instructor is also something that's beneficial. But apart from that, I would say something that differentiates it is the homework that you get. So the homework is not required, but it's recommended for our course. It's at least traditional homework requires like it's just more rote learning, but this is more creative. You have to like use your mind in ways that like you might have not problem solved like previously in any school or any course that you've done outside of school. I think that's what makes it different.
Hmm. And just now you said another thing that I want to follow up a little bit with, which is Daniel, as you and I both know, is truly a world-class researcher. He's a astrophysicist at MIT. It doesn't really get fancier than that. So tell me a little bit about your experience working directly with Daniel in such a small group setting and so intimately.
I think what was interesting about working with Daniel was how passionate he was about what he was teaching, because of course he's an astrophysicist, so he has the knowledge about what he's doing, but just having the passion to convey that knowledge to students and really answering our questions and igniting our curiosity regarding certain things when we're learning. I think that was what stood out to me. And apart from that, he was also extremely supportive outside of classroom. So where we actually had questions, we could like contact him via Slack or just, you know, have any questions or any questions about the research or the program itself. He was always open to such questions and answered them really good.
And I think it's also maybe worth acknowledging here that Daniel wasn't the sole instructor. There also was a TA. What was it like sort of working in this setting with not just Daniel and the TA, but also additionally with your cohort, who are like yourself, high school students with a deep passion and interest in astrophysics, who are willing to spend their summers doing a whole bunch of work and research. What was that experience like?
I think it was a really unique experience, I would say, because mostly the fact that they're choosing to do the course shows that they're motivated. And not only that, that creates like an environment where you're also getting motivated by what other students are doing. So it was a collaborative experience where we exchange ideas. If someone was stuck on a problem, we try to help them out. And just that exchange of ideas among people who are just as passionate as you are, that makes it so much easier to get through the course.
I'm curious. The program is online, which definitely is going to create some sort of limitations in terms of social interactions. But have you managed to sort of develop personal relationships with your mentor and your cohort in spite of the strictures of the online setting?
Well, yes. So we stayed in contact via Slack and Discord. So those were the two primary means we used to communicate. And often, like, not so much during the lecture timings, but like during the research part of the course, there was a lot of communication between not only within our cohort, but also with the instructor and the TA. I think it did help us build a more like personal relationship, since they knew us on a personal basis, what our strengths were and what our weaknesses were, and like try to guide us using that.
Incredible. So I think now is a good time to talk a little bit about your project. So even in my introduction of your project, I already stumbled because I didn't know what the words I was saying meant. Tell us a little bit, Rushat, about your actual project and what you looked into.
So my project was, in brief, it was about predicting some value called the photometric redshift. And we predicted that by analyzing data and using machine learning or neural networks to make a prediction on each of those values based on the training. So in brief, like photometric redshifts are certain values that show how much the light from an object, an astronomical object in space, has been stretched towards the red end of the spectrum. So as you may or may not know, that light is a print measured in wavelengths, right? So since the universe is constantly expanding, the light from certain astronomical objects takes time to reach us. And in that time, since the universe is expanding and the light is also going in the opposite direction towards us, it gets stretched a little bit. And the wavelength that gets stretched becomes more red in color, you could say. And the measure of that redness is called redshift. And photometric redshift is just a particular method used to measure that via telescopes and other methods.
Tell me what initially drew you to this particular phenomenon.
So because not only was it like not too complicated, because I wanted to start with something that I myself could understand and make a reasonable impact on the field. Because if I went with something that was too fancy, I would probably not have that much of an impact on the field itself. May not be able to come up with as high quality as a research paper that I could otherwise. And also because it was something that could be easily explained to people, right? Explaining photometric redshifts, as I just did, is slightly more easier than explaining some more complicated phenomenon. And there was also a lot of data readily available for free online, which made it more accessible to perform the data analysis on.
And what is, I guess, the significance of this phenomenon? So you told me a little bit about what these redshifts are, but what are their, let's say, scientific interests within sort of astrophysics?
So since the distance that the speed at which light travels is constant, and we can measure the redshift, and we can also you can use that information to find out how far certain astronomical objects are, and we can also use that information along with some other bunch of information to figure out how fast the universe is expanding. So just how far astronomical objects are, that would be the primary outcome of predicting redshifts, but there are also other outcomes such as predicting specific information about certain astronomical objects, like their size or maybe the rate at which they're going away from us or coming towards us.
I'm curious, Rushat, would you have imagined, let's say 3 to 4 months ago, that you would have, or maybe a little bit longer, because you might have been planning this already in three or 4 months ago, maybe let's say a year ago, would you have imagined that today you will have already done a project like this?
Certainly not, because although I did have some knowledge of what I wanted to do, I had like no way that I could actually implement my ideas, because all I had was knowledge, because there's a lot of freely available information online that you could read, but there's only so much you can do with that information without some guidance. So I think I would not have imagined to do this. Yeah.
Um, and tell me from, let's say, not just from the perspective of what you learned in terms of astrophysics, but more generally in terms of your understanding of the field, your relationship to it, your understanding of science. Has doing this more hands-on research, sort of really getting into the weeds of things, changed your understanding of where you stand with respect to research and science and astrophysics?
Yeah, I certainly realized that not only my interest, because since I was previously interested in astronomy and physics, like since we use something new that I have learned called machine learning in this project, I think I realized that I was more interested in that than like some other topics that I thought I would previously be interested in. So that helped me realize my interest in machine learning. But not only that, just the whole research process helped me realize that making research papers is not an easy process. It takes a lot of time and effort. And a lot of times I just imagine, oh, once I go to college, I'll publish research. It's not that easy, right? There's a lot of effort and time that goes into it, and it made me realize like the reality of actually publishing research. Not that I'm not into it, I still want to do research, but it just gave me a reality check, I would say.
Yeah, academia is rough. I can definitely tell you that. But it is also incredibly rewarding. And for those of you who are driven to it, it really is an incredibly meaningful space. So as we are now sort of gradually coming towards the end of the interview, I'm going to ask you a question that I usually close out these interviews with. And it is, and the question is this. Having gone through the process of CCIR, of embarking on this relatively difficult research project, working with Daniel and with your cohort and so on, you now know what doing research means and what doing research is like. For a lot of students coming into the program, they will be very daunted by the prospects of such an intensive and rigorous experience. They don't know if they, as high school students, can do research. So they might just have certain kinds of reservations about whether or not research is a good experience for them. What would you say to such a student knowing now what you do know?
Well, I would say that it definitely is hard, so as they would have imagined, but it's also rewarding, incredibly rewarding, because before starting the research project, I had no clue what I was going to do. But like once you actually experiment, trial and error, and try to experiment with new ideas and new projects, you come to realize that small steps that you take, like maybe every day you work a little bit or every week, those small steps can translate into like a really big project. And it's not, although it is a challenging process, it's not as hard as it seems, because just if you put in effort, you'll get something out of it. It's just as long as you put effort into that, I think it'll be a rewarding experience. But if you don't put in effort, I don't think it'll be getting you anywhere.
That's definitely true, Rushat. It's part of the, let's say, catch of the CCIR program, especially because we don't really have any way of, let's say, there's no cost to not doing work. This is not going to go on your transcript per se. It really does depend on the intrinsic motivation of the student to actually go do that work. And as I always say to students, the more you put into these programs, the more you can get out of them. So that's a really fantastic answer, Rushat. So with that, we have come to the end of our relatively brief interview. I want to say, Rushat, it's been an absolute pleasure learning about your experience at CCIR and about your project. I want to finally just wish you all the best on all your future academic and intellectual adventures, and say thank you so much for being on this podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.